Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Career Woman's Secret Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dawn, CEO and founder of Dr. Dawn ShopTalk Consulting. And today we're asking a big question. Are you speaking in a confident and powerful vocal register? Or are subtle habits in your voice actually holding you back? In this episode, we'll cover why the pitch of your voice can either signal confidence or undermine it, how some vocal habits are affecting how others perceive you, and 3 practical tips that you can use right away to sound more confident and professional. So come back and join us for episode 78, where we'll talk about it all right here on the Career Woman's Secret Playbook podcast.
Are you a strong, independent woman who's passionate about her career? Then this podcast is perfect for you. Based on her book, The Career Woman's Secret Playbook, career coach Dr. Dawn Hamby shares the kind of insider secrets you can only know if you've hired, fired, and promoted employees over the past 30 years. Here's today's episode.
Welcome back, everyone. I am so glad you're here for today's topic. I was thinking the other day about the power of our voices, and I have a personal story I'm going to share with you about why that came to mind, but it occurred to me that even though today is episode 78, I was sitting there thinking, I cannot believe we've not covered this. Now, as the CEO and founder of Dr. Dawn ShopTalk, you know I gave you guys a nickname a little while ago. I've been calling our audience shop talkers. That was not my invention. My daughter, who works part-time for my company, that was her idea, and I love it. Now, if you're offended by the name, I'm just going to apologize because I just think it's super cute. But not just that, because of what my company represents. So the reason I called my company Shop Talk is because to me, we're sitting around talking shop. I wanted to convey the idea that together we could be stronger by talking shop. In other words, talking about all those different issues that can affect our success at work. You know, I picture people sitting around the water cooler. Now, this was pre-COVID, okay, guys? When people actually did talk a lot at work. Now, of course, most of us are back in the office or on some sort of hybrid schedule, right? But talking about these issues is so important. And so I can't believe that I have all of these amazing podcast episodes and YouTube videos. And yet my company is called Shop Talk, and we've never talked about the one thing that is making talking possible. And that's right, it's your voice. Now, here's the truth. Your voice says a lot about you. Your voice could be conveying confidence or actually undermining it. Your voice really is your personal and professional brand. So it's a subtle way to kind of project your image, and oftentimes it goes overlooked. Like I was saying, I can't believe we have all these other episodes and haven't talked about it. Now, we have talked about the power of your words. I've got some other videos, and if you're new here, by the way, not only do I want to welcome you, but I want to let you know all throughout our episodes, whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us on the podcast, I will always reference other videos that I've got for you that could help you take a deeper dive on some of these topics. And I have quite a few playlists. So I mentioned branding. That's the first playlist I'm going to refer to, because if you've been listening for a bit, you know I love everything about branding, because branding, whether it's your personal or professional brand, really precedes you. I have only had 4 jobs my entire life. Okay, I was in the workforce for 31 years before starting my own company 3 years ago. This October will be 3 years. So I now get to do for myself what I did for everybody else. But you guys, the reason I got those jobs and didn't have to interview for them is because of branding. That's what I want for you. And your voice can be such a big part of that. Now, of course, when I'm coaching clients, especially if they are getting ready for an interview, I mean, ideally, you don't have to interview because your work ethic, in other words, your reputation, precedes you. That's what I mean about branding. And so I think your voice is such an important part of that. And again, just gets overlooked, right? Especially when it comes to women. So again, I'm just so excited to bring this topic, you guys. I find it so fascinating. So I've done some extra research for you guys about this topic. So we're going to get into that as well. Now, if you have been watching us on YouTube or listening to us for a while on the podcast, then you know we're always going to talk. Here we go, shop talk about the topic for a little bit because let me tell you, I just want you to be learned. I want our audience to always know a little bit more about it. I can't help myself, you guys. It's the former teacher in me. So I want to teach you a little bit about why it matters, how it may be affecting you. But you also know, although I'm a huge believer in discussing the issue, examining the problem, looking at it from all angles, I think that's such an important part of analyzing where you are, whether it's professionally or personally. But then my next goal is to always give you solutions, right? So we'll discuss the problem and then I'm going to give you some solutions. So we're going to start by talking about why it matters. I'm going to share some of the research with you. And then we're going to look at some strategies and steps you can put in place right away to make sure that you are portraying yourself as the beautiful, powerful, confident career woman I know that you are. So let's get to why it matters. One of the reasons it matters is because your voice and how you use it can directly impact your networking. In other words, the connections you make, the relationships you build, the number of referrals people might be sending your way or introductions they might be making. And you might be thinking, well, surely the voice doesn't do all of that. It's not going to do all of it, sure, but it is affecting things many times in a subtle way, in a way that you may not be aware of. And when you combine that with the words you use, it's a powerful combination. So one of the things that I do want to address here is the fact that next week, I'm going to take a deeper dive on those words. I want the women listening to this podcast to be able to speak eloquently, powerfully. Now, I do have some videos about why words matter and the power of your words and how they might be affecting you more than you think. I'll get into that a little bit later. So again, I'll include all of those playlists. But it's been a while since I've taken a deeper dive and given you examples. So I'm so looking forward to doing some extra research for you, and I'll have that ready for you next week. But today, just keep in mind that the way that you're speaking, okay, not just your word choice, but your tone, the way you end your sentences, all of these things combine to really affect how you are perceived. Again, that affects your brand, it affects everything. So speaking of the research, I'm going to give you 3 examples of what you would find if you were doing the research right now on voice and why it matters. Number 1, lower pitch equals perceived competence and confidence. In other words, if you're speaking in your higher register, you're not going to come across as an authority. You're not going to come across as if you're very sure of yourself or very confident. And the opposite is true. If you lower your register, it will be perceived differently. And what's interesting is there really are gender differences here. Now, sure, of course, we could say that in general, women speak and have a higher tone than the men would. Yes, in general, that's true. Now, I've met women that have very low registers, and that's kind of their natural place. But in general, the opposite's usually true, where a woman would speak a little higher. So we can make the argument, and there's some interesting historical references here too about broadcasting. I'll get to that in a minute. But just know that according to scientific research, when they've compared men and women, recorded their voices, and done multitudes of studies on this subject, here are the results. Both men and women, ironically, are more likely to select someone as a leader when they were presented with men and women's voices at different registers. In other words, when they heard recordings, the men and women that had the lower registers were perceived as leadership potential. If they had a higher register, they were not perceived that way. I find it fascinating that both men and women would perceive one another that way. So it didn't matter in terms of the gender, it mattered in terms of how low their voices were. So just think about it. If you're speaking in a higher voice, a higher register, it could come across as less assertive and less confident, right? So it makes sense that a lower register just sounds more like an authority figure. So other videos I have, I'm going to refer you to my Upskilling Secrets playlist. Again, I'll be sure to insert that on the iCard on YouTube if you're watching us on YouTube and in the description box. And then on the podcast, you can just check out our show notes. I'll have all the playlists and videos linked there. But the upskilling playlist will have everything from how to make your best first impression, how to ace the interview. And remember when I talked about other videos I've done about word choice and how that can help you be perceived as more confident? All of those videos are in that playlist. So be sure to check that out. Okay, here's a second example of why these vocal patterns really matter. This next one, I'm going to be very curious. Comment below and tell me if you've ever heard of this one before. The second example is that vocal fry undermines credibility. So that's what I was asking. Have you heard about this before? I really had not heard of vocal fry. I kind of understood what they meant because I've heard it before, even within myself. In fact, there are several places in various podcast episodes where you'll hear me do this. And I'm going to give you an example of that. I'm going to demonstrate that for you in a second. But basically, vocal fry is when at the end of the sentence, you're kind of running out of your breath a little bit. And when you do, you tend to have a raspy, kind of almost guttural sound at the end of your sentences. It kind of reminds me of the Valley Girl days, because an example of that would be like, it's Friday, like that. If you're saying that in speech, it's Friday. Or in our case, since we release our episodes on Monday, it would be saying like, it's Monday. Is that kind of trailing off and almost this kind of sound? Now, you might be thinking, I'm not walking around saying that, right? You're telling yourself that. You're not. You're not starting your sentences that way. You just could be ending your sentences that way. So, using myself as an example, on the podcast, I want my voice to definitely be seen as an authority on the subject I'm talking about, sure. But I'm not giving a presentation. I'm not going for an interview. I'm not trying to throw my hat in there for the promotion. So I'm not so worried about my voice having a more friendly or kind of upbeat demeanor. In fact, I want it to have a little bit of that, right? And so vocal fry is just more casual. It's kind of that vocal pattern you might have, just with friends. And that trailing off when you're trying to make an important point definitely can affect how you're perceived in terms of whether you're an expert, whether you're an authority on the matter, that kind of thing. So for me, on several podcast episodes, I've noticed once in a while my voice does that at the very end. In other words, in the outro. In the outro, I'll go ahead and thank people. I'll usually say something like, till next time. And then I'll always repeat the name of our podcast. And so when I say the word podcast at the very end, because it is kind of a longer name for a podcast, leave it to me. I love to talk. Another reason why I'm a podcaster. And of course, my company, ShopTalk, it says it all, right? So yeah, your girl loves to talk and have conversations with you. Well, when you're trying to do a good job on a microphone, yeah, you're going to kind of run out of breath a little bit. So I've noticed on the podcast at the very end, when I say, on the Career Woman's Secret Playbook podcast, in the intro, I say it that way, but on the outro, I tend to say podcast like that. I kind of did it again there. Okay. So in other words, it's kind of just friendly, almost kind of cutesy in a way, which is fine. If you're having a conversation, because that's the way I want my podcast to come across. I want to give you important information, but I want you to put your headphones in or listen to me in the car or listen to me while you're walking or exercising, doing the dishes, what have you. And if you're watching us on YouTube, same thing. I still want you to feel like you're having a conversation with me as your coach, but more importantly, with me as your friend. as your girlfriend. And so when I'm speaking to my girlfriends, I'm not going to be all formal and doing a presentation. It's going to have that banter. And so for me, I don't worry about that vocal fry on the pod. But if I was giving a professional presentation at a national conference, if I was working with one of my clients and they hired me to do a workshop, then yes, I'm definitely going to be more aware of my voice, especially when I am using a microphone to a large audience. So I just want you to be prepared. Start watching how you're ending your sentences, because that's actually going to bring me to the next example that you also might be doing that's giving your power away. But before I get to that, let me tell you about another playlist that could really help. It's my What's Holding You Back playlist. Again, I'll insert it here on YouTube and also on the podcast show notes. In that playlist, we have everything from how fear might be holding you back to how guilt may be doing the same thing. And we had a podcast not too long ago about that. And I also have several videos about perfectionism and how that is also getting in your way. And you might think it's ironic we're talking about perfectionism when I'm now asking you to scrutinize your voice. But it's not perfectionism to try to improve and to think about little things you may be doing that could be interfering with your success. And if there's a way we can tweak that easily, that's what I mean. I don't want you to become fanatical about this and watch every single time you utter a word or syllable. But it is important to put this on your radar, ladies, because again, I want each and every one of you to feel like the powerful, amazing women that you are. And it would crush me to know that I had this information, didn't share it with you, and it could affect how you're being perceived. I want your next job offer to be the one where they come to you and say, I think you'd be perfect for this job, Dawn. What do you think? I want you to have the same experiences I've had. In that regard, you will love it. Now, of course, if you need help, great. Reach out to us. We can help prepare you for that next interview. Do that one-on-one coaching to build your confidence. But I would love it even more if you didn't have to do that because your brand was so stellar that the next time there was an amazing career opportunity, they came to you instead. And working on strategies like these can really help you get there. So a third example of how you might be giving your power away is something we call uptalk. That's when you end your sentences as if you're asking a question. In other words, your voice goes up at the end of the sentence. Now, that's great if you're asking a question, right? No problem. But if you're trying to make a statement or give a perspective or a point of view, I'm thinking about some clients I have right now that are in San Diego and they're participating in a panel. Well, if you're on a panel, again, it is conversational. They are asking you for your opinion about something, but you still want to be careful about how you're answering those questions. Don't answer the question, ladies, with your own question or what sounds like your question, because you're not finishing your statement as a declarative point of view. You're instead almost asking for permission, is how it could come across, to make that statement. When you end your sentences that way, then again, you're undermining your own authority. So, for example, if you're trying to make this point and you say, in my experience, I've seen results as high as 53%, when you go up like that, it's as if you're telling the audience, I think it's 53%, but I'm not sure, even though the number is very specific. So that should tell you and your audience that you know what you're talking about, because again, you didn't just say about 50% or approximately 50%. You actually said 53%. But when you make that same statement and you end it with plenty of breath and you don't go up, but you stay at the same tone or even go down a little bit, now it could sound like this. Well, in my experience, the results were closer to 53%. When you say it like that, then again, you're going to sound like the authority. And at the very least, you're going to sound confident in your perspective, in your expertise, and your point of view. We just don't want to come across as if we're tentative and not sure what we're talking about. Now, does that mean we think we are the authority on everything? We never make a mistake and we're perfect? Absolutely not. I just want you to have the right mindset and build your confidence. And remember, you've got an important point of view to share. Now, if you need help with that, we've got a wonderful playlist on mindset and confidence. I'll insert it here. And in that playlist, of course, we're going to talk a lot about both of those things. And I even have some videos about how to have difficult conversations, because sometimes that holds us back as well. So if you're going to have a difficult conversation and confront a problem, and remember, confronting a problem does not have to be confrontational, then I want to give you scripts of how to go about saying that. And even if I gave you the perfect words, if your voice is not conveying your confidence and your expertise in that area, your message could be lost. So in that playlist, as I mentioned, guys, I've got some great examples of how to have difficult conversations, whether it's with your coworkers, with your employees, or even with your boss. So be sure to check that out. Okay, you guys, I'm going to give you a little history fact. This is example number 4, and it has to do with the history of broadcasting. I found this to be very interesting. So back in the day when this equipment was relatively new and the telephone systems were such where voices could come across as a little staticky and shrill, come to find out, oftentimes men sounded better on these broadcasting systems and over the radio and over telephone because of the way the equipment was built. And so lower registers sounded better across those airwaves. And the opposite was true for higher registers. So women ended up sounding kind of shrill. And if you sound shrill, that's not great, right? And definitely doesn't make you sound like the authority figure you could be. And so when you look at the history of broadcasting, I find it really interesting that some of the best broadcasters on television shows and on the news, many times they would train women to lower their voices. And not just women. I mean, I'm using women as an example because our voices do tend to be a little higher. But believe me, men got the same training. They worked on the accent to make sure your accent wasn't so regional that people couldn't relate to you. But they also worked on that broadcasting voice. And when you notice people in broadcasting, sometimes you might even meet someone that just has one of those great voices. Their voices usually are not super high. They tend to be more melodic, a little bit lower in the register. And oftentimes you'll hear people say, oh my gosh, you should be in broadcasting. Like when I shared that example from my networking group. So I've noticed that. I've really appreciated that in people that I know. Thinking of one of my favorite broadcasters, many of you know, I had the honor and privilege of being interviewed by Dominique Saxa. She has an incredible podcast called Over 50. And not only did I get to be on her broadcast, she was kind enough to be a guest on mine. I'll include the link to our interview on this podcast in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. But I think she's a great example of that as well. I mean, she has a beautiful sounding voice anyway, but you can tell she's been professionally trained to have that broadcasting voice, that way of projecting, but still very melodic, but still with that professional flair. It just sounds like someone who has a lot of confidence and poise. And after having met her in person, by the way, you guys know, I've shared that story. I can tell you her voice was just as fabulous and professional in person as it comes across on the airwaves. So again, anything we can do, let's learn from those fabulous broadcasters and make sure that our voices are serving us well. They really can be our calling card. So let's now take a look at what can we do about it. We've discussed the research. We know women are plagued with this a little bit more than the men. We know that there are at least 4 examples of where we may be going wrong, ladies. So now let's take a look at a couple of tips. Let's talk about some practical things we can start doing right now to help us make sure we're projecting that amazing image through our voices. Now, before we get to those practical strategies to help us fix all this, I also want to mention how this is affecting your networking. Since we know our voices could be projecting our credibility, our presence, and even our authority. Remember that when we're not speaking with that powerful eloquence, it could affect how people not only perceive you, but how much they're willing to do business with you. And if you're going to networking events, and I'm always encouraging you to do that. You never know where the next opportunity may be. And we also know through networking, that's how most people get their jobs. Yes, you got to have a great resume. And yes, we help people with that. However, I would much rather you be one of my clients that doesn't have to have that resume because, again, your network speaks for yourself. So, as they've often said, I know you've heard this before. It's not what you know, it's who you know. There definitely is a lot of truth to that. So, as you're building your network, I want you to remember people could be resistant to referring business to you or making introductions if your voice is portraying an image that's not really matching with what you're saying you could do. If you're saying you're an expert in that area, then again, we want to make sure your voice is portraying you in the best way possible. Now, you heard me say earlier that building your brand is so important. Again, I've got tons of videos about that in that playlist. But if you would like to join us for our next workshop, okay, we offered this last year. It was so popular. I'm bringing it back this year, a 2.0 version, if you will, because whenever we do workshops that we've done before, we're always going to update that for you and give you the latest information, the latest trends. I love research, you guys. That's one of the reasons your girl has not just one doctorate, but two. I just can't help myself. I love it. I love doing the research. But it's not just research based. These are time tested techniques that I bring to you. So if you are in the Little Rock area and want to join us on October 2nd for this networking workshop, I always host these at lunchtime because I want it to be a lunch and learn. And if you do join us in person, of course, lunch would be catered. Now, there's going to be more information about this on my website. I want you to wait just a couple of days. If you're listening to us the day this podcast is released, which will be on August 25th, 2025, my website is going through some maintenance because I'm updating a couple of things. So give us just a couple of days. When you do go check it out, just go to the workshop tab, and right there you can save your spot and register for the workshop. Now, if you're not in the Little Rock area and can't join us on October 2nd, our workshops run from 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m., then feel free to register anyway and just participate through our live stream. That's right. We'll send you a link and you can join us live. And not only do we discuss in length, in detail, how to build your professional and personal brand, my workshops always come with 21 days of daily motivational tips and tricks to help you stay on target. Because I don't want you to just get motivated at a workshop and then not do anything about it. So you will get an invitation to our private Facebook group where I will post daily tips and videos, and you will get to interact with all the other participants from the workshop. So it's a Facebook group just for us. And I'm so sorry if some of you have joined our Facebook group before and then you realize I closed it. It's because when I close it, it's really just for the workshop participants. I always feel so bad about that because whenever I create a new Facebook group for the different workshops, we have so much support on Facebook. Thank you guys so much that I've noticed that without me even asking, a bunch of people will join. Then I feel really bad when we have to close that one. So I'm going to just make sure that we're only opening up the Facebook group on my business page on Facebook. So make sure you're looking at Dr. Dawn's ShopTalk. When I open it, it's open for about a week, and then we close it just to the workshop participants. So if you do join, just make sure that we've got your right Facebook address and email so that you can stay connected with us for 3 weeks. Why 3 weeks? Well, you've probably heard it takes 21 days for something to become a habit. So that's why when we leave the workshop, we're going to post those daily tips for you and make sure you have all the support you need to accomplish your goals. Okay, you guys, let's get into now some strategies that can help you fix any of these problems if you're experiencing one or all of those examples. So tip number 1, I want you to anchor your pitch in the medium to low register. So practice making statements, practice what you're going to say if you have an upcoming presentation, and go ahead and record yourself. Your cell phone is a perfect resource. Go to the voice memo section. I've noticed my clients oftentimes don't even utilize that function. I think that function's amazing. You can record ideas. If you don't have a notebook, you can listen to yourself, talk to yourself, even in the car. I come up with some ideas for things, and instead of writing it down, I like recording it in my voice memo. And then I keep some of my favorite ones and listen back to it. Like a year or two later, I love listening to project ideas because once I've actually completed that project or offered that new product or service, I like going back and listening to what my original ideas were. And then you can hear how confident you are. You can hear if there's any fear or uncertainty in your voice. So when I coach clients before they make those presentations or are going for those interviews, we like to listen to how they're saying things. And I encourage my clients to send me those voice recordings so I can listen to it. But you be your own judge. Record and listen to yourself. I have an advantage because I have a podcast. Okay. But not everybody does. Although nowadays, so many people love podcasting. We're all jumping into the business, right? But in any case, guys, use the voice memo on your phone, play it back, and hear how you're coming across. Also, try to notice if you're saying certain things over and over again as a habit that also could be taking away from your expertise. And what I mean by that are things like, or like when you pause in between. If you're saying a lot or have these awkward pauses in between, that too could be affecting your confidence in public speaking. And if you're recording yourself again, you can hear your voice and your tone, but you can also hear if you've got some of those patterns going on. Now, I'll get into more of that next week when we talk about speaking eloquently and the words that we're using, but just keep that in mind. Number 2, remember when we talked about vocal fry and also uptalk? All right, going back to those recordings, listen to yourself, especially at the end of sentences. It's okay to ask plenty of questions, but if you are trying to make a statement and share a point of view or perspective, then again, it's important that you don't go up at the end of your sentences because again, you're going to sound uncertain. And that's not what we're going for here, right, ladies? Same on the vocal fry. If you're running out of breath, which is why we get that kind of sound at the end of those sentences, then just take a minute, go ahead and pause, and then come back in so you can finish that sentence strong. A third tip I want to share with you is for you to practice controlled variation. In other words, no monotony. I don't want you to sound like Charlie Brown's teacher. Remember that if you ever watched Charlie Brown cartoons, you would hear the teacher always depicted in this blah, 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 this horrible voice, right? And it was always the same tone. You guys, I had a professor in college. Oh my gosh. He was so learned, sweetest person in the world, but he taught botany. And that in of itself to me was not the most fascinating class, but the worst part was he had this monotonous voice and his class started at 7:40 in the morning. Why it started at 7:40, why they couldn't wait till 8 o'clock, that's a whole other issue, okay? But to have a monotonous teacher who's teaching us botany, and unfortunately, I had the brilliant idea of signing up for it in the winter. Why I would sign up for botany during that term, the fall term, instead of waiting till the spring? Yeah, I had to identify trees just from the bark, people. I didn't even get a chance to look at the leaves, which would have told me so much more about the trees. My college advisor, I'm still upset about that. I'm not going to name you. Okay. But nobody gave me guidance about that. So that class was not easy. And I really believe it could have been a little easier if my professor had more enthusiasm in his voice. So really think about that. Okay. You don't have to be in the broadcasting world to work on making sure your voice is not too monotonous. Just in regular conversation with coworkers or with your boss, you will come across like leadership material if your voice is not monotonous and instead sounds engaging and persuasive. So really think about that. All right, ladies. So what's next? I already told you next week we're going to be talking about how to speak more powerfully, how to speak more eloquently. So I want you to be thinking about that for next week. Come with your comments and questions. I love hearing from our audience, and I think we're going to have lots to talk about next week when it comes to not just how we're saying things through the power of our voices, but also the words we're using. So I'm looking forward to bringing that to you next time. Well, that's it for today, Shop Talkers. Don't forget, your voice is your calling card. Use it with confidence. Cut out those habits that weaken it. And watch how differently people will respond. Because at the end of the day, your career, your choices, your voice, and yes, your day are all in your control, even when it doesn't feel like it. That's why at the end of each and every episode, we wrap up with our motto, and it's this: if you're not having a fantastic day, you have the power to make it one. Until next time, this is Dr. Dawn reminding you, your voice is your power, so use it well. I know our episode is over, but this is just the beginning. If you're ready to take action but don't know where to start, just head over to drdawnshoptalk.com for lots of free resources, ways to work together, and for even more. Subscribe to the Dr. Dawn Shop Talk YouTube channel. Remember, ladies, you don't have to take this journey alone. I've got you covered. Till next time.